Hey guys, welcome back to our biochemistry series of Vida Doctors. I am Omkar and today our topic is isomerism in carbohydrates. See, I would suggest you not to leave this topic unlearned because questions do come from these areas in your PG entrance exams. And it would be very foolish of you if you do mistakes in such an easy topic. I call such questions as halwa questions. You know halwa? It is a very delicious Indian pudding. So solving these questions will be as easy as eating this pudding. For the same reason, I would be very disappointed if you do blunder in such an easy topic in questions from these areas, right? That's why I want you guys to pay attention to the class today and note down everything I'm teaching you. Okay, let's start the topic with simple definition. What is isomerism? Iso means same and merism means molecular formula. So isomerism is the phenomenon in which there are two or more compounds but they have same molecular formula. The number of atoms are the same but the way in which they are arranged, they are positioned and they are oriented in space are different. The way in which they are connected is different, right? So these compounds are known as isomerism. For example, if we take C6H12O6, which compounds can we form from it? We can form glucose, but at the same time we can form fructose also. We can get galactose, mannose, maltose, right? So many different compounds, more than 16 compounds in fact we can get from this simple C6H12O6. The number of atoms are same but the compounds formed are so many. And why are they different? Because the way in which the atoms are connected to each other are different in them. Now what do I mean by arrangement here? Arrangement means connections plus orientation. So remember this formula. I will ask you in future also about this formula and we will be solving our questions by this approach only. So let's take our two common examples of glucose and fructose. What is the difference between glucose and fructose? They both are having C6H12O6 only, but here the carbonyl group in glucose is present at first position, whereas in fructose it is present at second position. In glucose there is aldehyde formed and here in fructose we have a ketone group, right? So the way in which the carbon is connected to the oxygen and OH, hydrogen is very different, right, in both of these structures. So that is what I was talking about. The connections and orientations are different in these compounds but the number of atoms are same. This is called as isomerism. Now due to this factor, due to this phenomenon, these compounds also differ in their chemical and physical properties. But obvious, some might be having different melting points, some might be having different boiling point, some would be reducing sugars, some would be non-reducing sugars. So that depends. Okay, now when we learn isomerism in carbohydrates, we specifically focus on monosaccharides. What are monosaccharides? They are nothing but simplest forms of carbohydrates. So if we see a range from 3 carbon to 6 carbon monosaccharides, we get triose, tetrose, pentose and finally 6 carbon hexose. So we will be learning isomerism especially in these 4 class of compounds. Okay, great. Let's start with some basics. What is a Fischer projection? You might have heard it n number of times in your lower standards also, but still I want you to get the concept behind this Fischer projection. Usually we draw a 3D structure like this, right? This is a 3-dimensional tetrahedral structure of carbon having all of its 4 valencies X, Y, Z, W for representation right now. This wedge represents the valency of carbon which is coming out of the plane towards us, right? So Z is coming towards us out of the plane of this page and W is going behind the page of the plane. So when I draw dashed lines, what does that indicate? That it is going behind. Wedge indicates that it is coming front towards us, right? So as I said, it is a tetrahedral geometry. What is the angle of tetrahedral geometry? It is 109.5 degree, right? Now suppose I tell you to see the same structure, to watch the same structure from this angle here. So if you will be observing this structure from this angle, how would you imagine the position of atoms? You may feel free to pause the video and answer. Okay, so Z will come to the left, W will come to the right, X and Y would go up and down. Now if you notice carefully, from this angle it would appear like Z and W would come out of the plane towards us, right? Just like this here we have drawn wedge, that's why. And X and Y would go inside the plane of the page. So that's why I have drawn here dashed lines. Now what is Fischer projection? In Fischer projection we write the same 3D structure in 2D like this. So we don't concentrate on wedges and dashed lines. We simply draw linear lines between these atoms. Now why is it necessary to learn Fischer projection? Because when we study big molecules, for example glucose, you may see that there are almost 6 carbons. So just imagine, suppose if we draw each and every carbon with this three-dimensional tetrahedral geometry, wouldn't it be a big mess? It would be a chaos, right? We would be spending our most of the time just finding the atoms. Where is the carbon? Where did the oxygen went? Oh, where is the OH, right? So to avoid that and to simplify our learning, we drew the same structure in a linear pattern so that all the atoms can be accommodated in just one plane itself, in just one page. Now that doesn't mean that the bond angle here becomes 90 degrees. No, it is still 109.5 degrees only. Please remember that here the carbons are having tetrahedral geometry only, having a bond angle of 109.5 degrees. We have just drawn it in the Fischer projection in 2 dimensions for learning the connections of the atoms, the arrangement of their branches, and to know how they are arranged with each other, just for simplification, for learning purpose. Otherwise it's a 3D structure only in reality, right? So here the carbon is connected to the OH and H. In fact, second, third, fourth and fifth carbon are connected to the OH and H only. First carbon is of carbonyl group connected to the oxygen and hydrogen, and the sixth carbon is connected to the OH and H and 2 hydrogens. This was the connections. And what is orientation? If I speak of orientation, here the first, third and fourth carbons are attached to OH and H, but here the OH is on right side, whereas here the OH is on left side. This difference of orientation is what we were speaking about in that formula. So arrangement again is connections plus orientation. Okay. Now let's learn types of isomers. We have basically 2 types of isomers: structural isomers, also called as constitutional isomers, and stereoisomers. In constitutional isomers, the connectivity of atoms are different. For example, in glucose, we saw that the carbonyl group was present at the first position. But if I change that position of carbonyl group to the second carbon, what it will become? It will become fructose, right? So the connectivity will be different, and those are called as constitutional isomers. And in stereoisomers, the connectivity will be same, but their orientation in space will be different. For example, OH and H I spoke in the last structure of glucose, where the third position of carbon was differing from the second, fourth and fifth positions. Usually they are usually the OH is on right side, but at the third carbon the OH is flipped onto the left side. That is stereoisomerism, which we will see later. But let's first concentrate on the constitutional isomerism. Now what was the formula I gave you for the arrangement? Arrangement is nothing but connectivity plus orientation. So here comes our approach, what I was talking about. Constitutional isomers deals with connectivity. So C for constitutional, C for connectivity. And stereoisomers have same connectivity. Then what is the difference? The difference is of orientation. Okay. Now let's learn this constitutional isomers with some examples. Suppose we have a structure and this structure. Here the number of atoms are same, but when I start numbering, here the OH is at second position, but here the OH is at third position. So this becomes our pentane 2-ol and this pentane 3-ol. This constitutional isomerism is called as positional isomerism, where the position has been differed. Okay. If I take pentane, what I can do in this simple structure is that I can still replace this methyl group from here to the second position. I can shift it, right? And what I will get? I will get 2-methyl butane. Again, what I can do? I can shift this methyl group also to the second position again. What I will get then? 2,2 dimethyl propane. This type of constitutional isomerism is called as chain isomerism. So likewise, we have lots and lots of constitutional isomerism. For example, tautomerism, metamerism, and ring chain isomerism. But when we talk about carbohydrates, we specifically deal with functional isomerism. Let us take our old examples again, glucose and fructose. What difference did we saw in glucose and fructose? That here the functional group is aldehyde and here the functional group is ketone. So glucose is a hexose sugar containing aldehyde and aldehyde containing hexose sugar. So can I call it as aldose sugar? Definitely, right? And what will be fructose then? Ketose sugar, because it is a ketone containing hexose sugar. So both glucose and fructose are having same molecular formula, that is C6H12O6. But what is the difference? The way in which the atoms are connected to each other are different, as such that they are forming a different functional group. That is called as functional isomerism. So this was all about constitutional isomers or structural isomers. Let's now proceed towards stereoisomers. Now what do we remember about stereoisomerism? What had we discussed? That here the connectivity of the atoms is same, but their orientation in space is different. Suppose we have these two structures. Now they both have same number of atoms. Agree? They both are having same connections also this time. Here also there is a pentane, here also there is a pentane. Here also the OH is at second position, the same here at second position only. That's why they both have the same name also. They both are pentane to all. Then what is the difference? The difference is here the wedge is throwing out the OH towards us, and here the dashed lines are throwing away the OH behind the page. So their orientation in space is different, right? That is called as stereoisomerism. When you have all same connections, same number of atoms, same name also, but the way in which the atoms are positioned in the space is different. That is stereoisomerism. See, we have so many different varieties of stereoisomers. Let's start with enantiomers first. Enantiomers are those pairs of molecules, they are the pair of molecules which exhibit the property called as chirality, that is non-superimposable mirror images. So there is a condition for this enantiomerism. What is that condition? As we discussed in the definition, that only and only if the molecule possesses this property of chirality, only those molecules are able to show the enantiomerism. Only those pair of molecules can be termed as enantiomers. So again, what is chirality? Non-superimposable mirror images. So can I break this thing into mirror images plus non-superimposable? This becomes our new formula in case of stereoisomers. Let us understand this formula with a simple example of our hands. Our hands are mirror images of each other. Agree? Right? They are mirror images of each other. But if we try to superimpose them, they are not superimposable. You can clearly see that the thumb is not at all superimposing with this thumb, and other fingers also are not in a sync. So despite the hands being mirror images of each other, they can't really superimpose, right? They are non-superimposable. So we can call our hands chiral because they show the property of chirality. Similarly, our molecules also show this property of chirality, provided that they have a chiral carbon. Now what is this chiral carbon? Simply remember this, that a carbon having all of its valencies filled with different atoms. For example, W, X, Y, Z. Here I can have OH, here I can have chloride, here bromide, and here hydrogen. So all of the atoms should be different. Then we can term that carbon as chiral carbon, because only those carbons are able to show the property of chirality, that is mirror images as well as non-superimposability. So if any molecule has to be chiral, has to possess the property of chirality, they must have chiral carbons in them. In fact, these chiral carbons form the basis of the entire stereochemistry. They are the backbone of your stereochemistry. Sir, I'm still not clear, what are you bluffing about? Okay, don't worry, let us understand it. Some simple examples. The question reads, find enantiomers. So here in this pair of molecules, first check whether their connectivity of atoms is the same. Here all the atoms are same, all are connected to a single carbon, so the connectivity is same. Then they are for sure not constitutional isomers. Then we can proceed towards stereoisomerism, right? So how to find whether they are enantiomers or not? What was the formula for enantiomerism? Chirality equals to mirror images plus non-superimposable. So the molecules to be enantiomers, they should possess the property of chirality. So tell me, are these two molecules mirror images of each other? See, what happens when you place a mirror between them? What does a mirror does? It basically changes everything to its opposite side, right? So here the hydrogen and bromide are pointing towards the right, and here they are pointing towards the left. Similarly, here the chloride is pointing to the left, and here the chloride is pointing to the right side, and OH will be the same here. So what is this mirror doing? It is changing the sides totally to opposite, right? And that's what a mirror does in actual. So they are mirror images, but are they superimposable? Let's check. So here you can clearly see that OH being in the same plane is getting superimposed, but hydrogen went to the different sides, and chloride and bromide are also not in a proper sync. So these are not superimposable for sure. So are both the conditions are getting fulfilled? They are mirror images and non-superimposable as well. So they are enantiomers. Now in this pair of molecules, The number of atoms as well as the connectivity is the same. But here there is a wedge and here there is a dashed line. So in that perspective, they are opposites. So they are mirror images of each other. That is, if you place a mirror between them, they will appear you to be the mirror images. See, if you don't understand it like this, we can do it in left-right aspect also. You just have to imagine it in that way. Just tilt the molecules towards each other and check whether they are mirror images of each other or not. As you can clearly see, here they are the mirror images of each other. If you place a mirror between them, they will reflect each other. Here the OH is on right, so here the OH is on left side, right? So the first condition is fulfilled, that they are mirror images. What about the second condition? Let's check. See, they are not superimposable, so they are also enantiomers. Now here in this example, we will be dealing with Fischer projections. There is a different approach of solving questions of Fischer projections. Up till now, we saw every example which contained the wedge or the dashed lines, right? This was the 3D structures. We can flip the structures, tilt the structures, rotate it anywhere to find if they are mirror images or they are superimposing or not. But with the Fischer projections, there are some restrictions. If you remember, Fischer projections are nothing but the two-dimensional representations of 3D structures, right? We are dealing everything in the one plane itself in Fischer projections. If I have to check whether the molecules are mirror images or superimposable or not, can we flip the molecules and check? See, here we have y-axis and x-axis. When we try to flip the molecule, we have to use the z-axis as well. This is a Fischer projection case. We have to deal everything in the one plane itself. We have to deal everything in this x and y axis only. So what options do we have? Only two options. Either rotate it clockwise or rotate it anti-clockwise 180 degree and check whether they are mirror images or not, or they are superimposable or not. So let's rotate it. When we rotate, we can clearly see that they are mirror images of each other. Here the OH is on right side, here the OH is on left side. COH, COH, CH3, CH3. They are in the one axis only, so they will be the same. Rest, these are on the horizontal axis in front of the mirror, so they will change their positions. Now let's check whether they are superimposable or not. See, here only the COH and CH3 are getting synced. But what about OH and H? They are not. Let's try without rotating it. See, still OH and H are now getting superimposed, but COH and CH3 are not. So whatever we do, they will not get superimposed. Hence, they are enantiomers. Now, there is one more thing you have to remember this, that you cannot make or break the bonds here. That is, you cannot break an atom from somewhere and join it somewhere else, like this or like this. No, it is not allowed. The only thing accessible to you is to rotate either anti-clockwise or clockwise 180 degrees, right? Okay. Now moving to the second condition of enantiomers. The second condition says that enantiomers should not have any symmetry within them. They should not be symmetrical in themselves. Suppose I take this molecule. When we draw its mirror image, it will something look like this, right? But if you observe carefully, there is a plane of symmetry. That is, if I divide the molecule by any one of the plane and I found that it is symmetrical, then it is understood that there is a plane of symmetry within this molecule, and such molecules cannot be enantiomers because such molecules get superimposed. If I had cut this molecule from this plane, it wouldn't have appeared to be symmetrical, but as I said, any one of the plane would go. So here I found that this plane was working a symmetry for me, and due to the presence of internal plane of symmetry, they cannot be enantiomers because mirror images of such molecules get superimposed. See, if I try to superimpose like this only, they won't get superimposed. Let's try rotating it. Now if I check the superimposability, they are clearly superimposable. Such molecules, despite of having chiral carbons also, are not enantiomers. See, this carbon is having all the 4 different valencies. Here we have methyl, OH, hydrogen and a different carbon group. And here also the carbon has the same case. Still, they are not enantiomers, despite of having chiral carbons also, despite of being mirror images also, because they had a plane of symmetry within them. Such molecules are called as meso compounds. And meso compounds do not show enantiomerism. So what were the 2 conditions of enantiomerism? First of all, they should possess the property of chirality. Second, they should not have a plane of symmetry within them. So these are not enantiomers. Okay. Now here in this example, it is the same molecule, but we have just swapped the H and OH position. Otherwise, it was the same molecule we had seen in the previous slide. But due to this stereoisomerism, the plane of symmetry is lost. Now if I draw a plane here, they won't be symmetrical anymore. If I draw its mirror image and try to superimpose, they won't get superimposed. Let's try rotating it also. See, still they are not superimposing. H and OH are not in a sync, right? So checking internal plane of symmetry is also important, and it is very easy to recognize such compounds. You will understand it when you see a molecule, whether they are having a plane of symmetry or not. It is not that difficult. So these are enantiomers. Now every pair of enantiomers are assigned some configurations, capital D and capital L configurations. Let's take our glucose this time. How many chiral carbons can you see here in this compound? 1, 2, 3 and 4. Only 4 chiral carbons. Why not this sixth one? Because it contains 2 hydrogen. But what was the condition for chiral carbon? That all 4 atoms should be different. But here 2 of the atoms are hydrogen only, so they can't be chiral carbons. What about the first carbon? Whenever a carbon contains a double bond, the attached atom is counted twice. So we will be counting this oxygen 2 times. That's why first carbon is also not chiral carbon. So in total we have 4 chiral carbons. Now while assigning the D and L configurations, we always check the position of OH on the last chiral carbon, or some people say penultimate carbon. Here the OH is present on the right side, so we will give it as D configuration. So what will be its name? D glucose, right? And suppose if the OH on the penultimate carbon or the last chiral carbon is present on the left side, it will be assigned as L configurations. So that is the difference between D and L configuration. But capital D and capital L, most of the students are confused between capital D capital L and small d small l. I will clear this confusion by discussing both difference as well as similarity. First let's discuss the difference. The difference is that the small d and small l belongs to optical activity. This optical activity is nothing but the property of enantiomers. They are the property of enantiomers to rotate the plane polarizing light either clockwise or anti-clockwise. Now what do we mean by that? Suppose we have a general light. We have a light source, normal light source, and it is throwing the light. It will throw the light in all planes, right? We will hit this light with a polarizer. What will this polarizer do? It will cancel all the planes of light such that light propagates only in one plane. So after passing through the polarizer, we have created a plane polarized light, a light which is spreading, propagating only in one plane. Now suppose we took a sample tube which is filled with any enantiomer. It could be capital D enantiomer, it could be capital L enantiomer, anything it could be. And we pass the plane polarizing light through it. What will this enantiomer do? It will either rotate the plane polarizing light to the right side, that is clockwise, or anti-clockwise to the left side. And we will place an analyzer at the last which will check whether the light has rotated or not. And the angle alpha will tell us by how much angle it has been rotated. If the enantiomer rotates the plane polarizing light to the right or clockwise, we denote that enantiomer as small d, which represents dextrorotatory or plus. If it had rotated the light towards left or anti-clockwise, it would have been small l or minus. Mostly we use plus or minus to prevent the conflict between the capitals and smalls. Suppose for example, we filled this sample tube with the D glucose, the glucose which had OH on the right side, on the penultimate carbon. Now because the D glucose is an enantiomer, we know for sure that it is going to rotate the plane polarizing light somewhere. But we don't know for sure whether it will rotate it right side or to the left side. We don't know anything. We don't know until and unless we check it experimentally. So the results are totally experimental. Now after analyzing it in the laboratory, we found that this D glucose rotates the plane polarizing light to the right side, that is clockwise. So hence we will name this glucose as capital D small d glucose or capital D plus glucose. It is not necessary that if OH is present on the right side, then it will rotate the light to the right side only. You know, it can be to the left side also, to the right side also. Now for example, suppose if we take D fructose rotates the plane polarizing light to the left side despite of being D, capital D, despite of having the OH on the right side like the glucose only. Still it is rotating the light to the left side. What do you conclude by this? That optical activity is not dependent on the capital D and capital L configurations. They both are totally independent. If any enantiomer has the configuration capital L, it can show optical activity of small d or small l, plus or minus. because this optical activity is not dependent, is independent of this D and L configurations. The only requirement is that it should be an enantiomer, because only enantiomers have this property of showing the optical activity. Let's now discuss this similarity between them. Similarity, as I said, that only and only enantiomers can show the optical activity. That is, if any compound is showing optical activity, it has to be an enantiomer, and if any compound is enantiomer, it has to show optical activity. So we know this for sure, that every enantiomer is showing some optical activity, but we don't know in which direction will it throw the light, to the right side or to the left side. The only and only thing we know, that if any compound is showing optical activity, then it has to be an enantiomer, or if I have an enantiomer, it will definitely show some optical activity. But along with that, one more thing you have to keep in mind, that both the phenomenon are independent of each other. If an enantiomer is showing clockwise rotation, it does not mean that it has capital D configuration. It can have capital L also. For example, D fructose, as we saw, it was showing the optical activity to the left. So does it mean that it will have capital L configuration? No. Suppose I have an L enantiomer. It can rotate the plane polarizing light to the left also, to the right also. I can't say it for sure. I have to check it experimentally. But since it is an enantiomer, I can definitely tell this you that it will show some optical activity. So optical activity has nothing to do with the capital D and capital L configuration of the enantiomers. The only requirement is that the compound should be enantiomer, whether it be L, whether it be D. One more thing about optical isomers, all meso compounds are optically inactive. Why? Because, as I said, optical activity is the property of enantiomers. What are enantiomers again? The compounds which show chirality. What was the formula for chirality? Mirror images plus non-superimposable. Meso compounds fulfill only one characteristic, that is mirror images, but they fail to show the second characteristic, that is they superimpose, and if at all they superimpose, they can be claimed as identical. That is, those two molecules will be the same. Enantiomers are similar. There is a difference of stereochemistry between them, but meso compounds are totally superimposable on each other, so they are the same. That's why meso compounds don't have their enantiomers, and therefore they cannot show the optical activity. Okay, let's see what are diastereomers. Up till now we have looked all the compounds which were actually mirror images. Well, diastereomers are the stereoisomers which are not mirror images. So the story of chirality ends here only. I have seen a lot of students getting confused between the enantiomers and diastereomers. But now if you look at it, it is really simple. Okay, tell me what's the relation between these two structures? Always remember to go in sequence. First check whether they have same connectivity or not. Both the carbons have OH and CH3. And here also the connectivity looks like the same. So they are not constitutional isomers for sure. So we have to check for stereochemistry. But which type of stereoisomers are they? That you have to decide. Tell me, do they look mirror images? You can also try rotating the compound clockwise or anti-clockwise, and you may pause the video to answer it. I hope you got the answer. They are not mirror images. So stereoisomers which are not mirror images are diastereomers. Here there is no need of looking for superimposability. We check superimposability only when the compounds are mirror images. So how to identify the difference between enantiomer and diastereomer? First, check if the given two structures are mirror images or not. If they are not, then take diastereomers. If at all they are mirror images, then check superimposability. If they don't superimpose, then they are enantiomers. And if at all they superimpose, then they are meso compounds. Now if you have noticed carefully, we know such structures by the name of cis and trans configurations. We have learned it in our lower classes as geometrical isomers. So let's learn one more thing about them, that they fall under the category of diastereomers. Okay, what's the relation between these two structures? These are stereoisomers for sure, but which one? They don't appear as if they are mirror images, because for being mirror images, everything of the chiral carbons should be opposite in the second structure. So if we have a wedge here, we should have a dash lines here, and if we have a dash line here, we should have a wedge here. Everything should be on the opposite. If here we have two dash, then there should we have two wedge. If at all they are not mirror images, then they are diastereomers. Let's solve these structures. If you notice carefully, we can rotate it and establish a mirror image. But when you try to superimpose them, they won't get superimposed. Hence, these are enantiomers. Now, if we check diastereomers in our monosaccharides, it is very simple to do that in the Fischer projections. So let's take D-mannose and D-galactose. Here they are clearly visible that they are not mirror images. By rotating them also, you cannot establish a mirror image thing in them. So these are diastereomers. Recognizing these diastereomers are very easy really. For enantiomers you have to do extra efforts, that is you have to check superimposability also. But diastereomers you can catch very easily. Now here these structures appear as if they are mirror images of each other. But there is a plane of symmetry within these structures. And that's why they are not enantiomers, they are meso compounds. But if at all you miss to check the plane of symmetry, that is also okay, because later if you check for superimposability by rotating it or not, you will find that they are superimposable. So by that way also you may establish the relation of meso compounds between them. So these are meso compounds. What about them? Do they appear you as mirror images? Of course not, they are not opposites. So these are diastereomers. I hope you got the concept of diastereomers. It's really easy, right? Okay. Now let's try to solve the questions from a different approach. Find enantiomers. Let's try solving it quickly. We just have to find which structures can have their enantiomeric pair. This structure has a plane of symmetry, so this is a meso compound. Here the molecule looks asymmetric, so they can have their mirror images. This molecule also has no plane of symmetry, so enantiomer of this compound is also possible. But here if we cut the molecule from this side, we can have a plane of symmetry, a clear plane of symmetry we can see. So this is also a meso compound. Hence these two are enantiomers and these two are not. Let's move towards epimerism now. Firstly, if you don't know this, I would like to inform you that epimers and anomers are both part of diastereomers itself. You can say they are subcategories of diastereomers. So what are epimers? Epimers are nothing but diastereomers only. They are a type of diastereomers only, but a special type of diastereomers which differ their configuration only at one of the chiral carbon. At any one of the chiral carbon from the entire structure, the configuration will be different. Let's take for example mannose and glucose. They are not mirror images of each other, so definitely they are diastereomers only. But if you look closely, you can find that the configuration is differing only at C2 position. The H and OH are swapped only at one position. That's why they are not forming mirror images, or else they would be perfect enantiomers. You can say they are just one step away from that. If I take galactose also, glucose and galactose also differ in only one carbon configuration, that is at C4 level. So such structures which differ in their configurations only at any one of the chiral carbon, they are termed as epimers of each other. So can I say mannose and glucose are C2 epimers of each other? Likewise, galactose and glucose are C4 epimers of each other. Likewise, we have so many different kinds of epimers. We can check this between ultrose and galactose, between mannose and fructose. We have different kinds of hexoses, right? So we can check for epimerism in any one of them. Here these two are special cases, but here these are two best examples which we should remember. So for glucose you must remember C2 epimer and C4 epimers. How I memorized it was mannose has 2N, right? So 2N C2. Hence mannose is a C2 epimer because it is having 2N in it. Let's now move towards anomerism. Anomers also are a type of diastereomers only, but here the configuration difference is at the first position of a cyclic compound. Remember, cyclic compound. Before explaining you the definition, I would like to tell you one fact that in nature, monosaccharides exist in an equilibrium between linear and cyclic forms. Let's see in short how does cyclization of the linear compounds occur. Suppose we have this D-glucose. Now we all know this from our lower classes that oxygen is more electronegative, so it will try to pull the electron density towards itself, due to which carbon gets partial positive charge and oxygen gets partial negative charge. Now here in this OH the charges develop. Hydrogen will have positive and oxygen obviously will have negative charge, because here also the electronegativity concept applies. Now why only this OH and not the other OH? I will tell you this later to you. First let's see what's happening here. This positive will try to approach the negative oxygen. So the hydrogen will move towards oxygen. It will try to catch the oxygen, due to which at the first carbon also there will be H and OH. Here the H will join the oxygen. So what it will form? It will form OH here, and the remaining oxygen will combine with the carbon here, and this will give us a hemiacetal group. Now what is a hemiacetal compound? Whenever a carbon is attached to the OH as well as to the OR, let me draw the OR for you here. This will be our OR entirely. So this carbon is attached to the OH as well as to the OR. Such compounds are called as hemiacetal compounds, and this is how a closed structure of glucose looks like. But this is just for our representation purpose. In actual, it looks like a closed ringed structure. Wait, like this. This is called a Haworth projection. All these three OH which were present on the right side moved downwards. So we have tilted the structure like this, you can say. It has fallen down to like this, and all the OH present on the right side will move downwards. Now on the first carbon we drew OH on the right side, that's why it has fallen downwards. So whenever if the OH is present downwards at the first carbon, then it is called as alpha position. If at all it had moved upwards, we would have called it as beta position. So if I had drew the OH on the left side instead of right, here it would be at the beta position, right? So we will call the first structure as alpha D glucopyranose and second structure as beta D glucopyranose. Now why pyranose? Any monosaccharide containing 6 members are called as pyranose. If it would have been 5 members, we would have called it furanose. For example, fructofuranose. Now why did we wrote D? Because this particular glucopyranose has been formed by the D glucose. If here we had used L glucose, then it would be alpha L glucopyranose and beta L glucopyranose. So let's clear that doubt also, that why this OH only got charges developed. Because only and only when we select this particular OH, we will get a 6-membered saccharide, which are relatively more stable. If suppose I had chosen this OH, a 5-membered saccharide had been formed, which is less stable. That's why we choose particularly this OH. At last, most important thing about D and L configurations. Now you might take these configurations lightly. You would be like, okay fine, it's just a difference of D and L, or else both are same structure only. But when you will know their application in our body, you will be shocked. Tell me one thing, when you look at your feet, they look very much alike, having same dimensions. Then why can't you fit your right foot in your left shoe? Because at last there is some difference, that the left and right foot are mirror images of each other. They might appear you as the same, and you also would be like, okay, that's fine, it's just a difference of a mirror only, rest all the things are same. But in actual, it had such an important application. After all, you cannot manufacture same shoe for both the feet. You ought to have a different shoe for each of your foot. Similarly, in our body also, we have some receptors, and those receptors are specific for even D and L enantiomers. So it's not that simple that we have a glucose molecule and we have its receptors on an enzyme. No, we should specifically have D glucose for that receptor to recognize it. Let's try this molecule for example. Suppose this one is the D enantiomer, and this receptor here can recognize the D form. See, it perfectly fits in all the sites. Now let's take its mirror form, that is L enantiomer. Let's use the same receptor for this L form also and try to fit it. Is it matching? No. Orange and green are not syncing here, only red is syncing. For the same reason, D monosaccharides are abundant in our body and not its L form, because body has majorly receptors for D form. For example, D glucose. Similarly, with amino acids, L amino acids are more abundant as compared to D amino acids, because the body's machinery recognizes L amino acids and not D. However, there are some instances where people have receptors for both the forms, maybe for 2 or 3 chemicals, or maybe sometimes even more. This was the reason why thalidomide failed in earlier 1950s and 60s. Our body naturally produces only one type of isomer, but pharmaceutical companies manufacture both D and L isomers of the same drug, like a mixture. And here lies the problem. Thalidomide was actually created to help morning sickness in pregnant women. However, it caused malformations of limbs in newborn babies. Thousands of babies were born with defective limbs. It was later discovered that D-thalidomide was safe to use, but its L form was the culprit, which was acting as a teratogen. Teratogen is any chemical that causes abnormality in fetus. Since then, thousands of researches were done to separate the D form and L form from the drugs. But still, more than 90% of the drugs sold today are a mixture of both D and L forms. Okay, so thank you so much for watching this video up till the end. I know it was a little big video today, but important at the same time. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video, share it with your friends, comment down your reviews below, and subscribe to our channel, Meet the Doctors.